Deep inside the forest of Belgian Ardennes sits one of Formula One's greatest circuits. 7 kilometers of elevation, flat-out commitment, unpredictable weather, and corners that have terrified racing drivers for generations. This is Spa-Francorchamps, a track where weakness cannot remain hidden for long. A bad setup is exposed down the Kimmel Straight, a nervous driver is exposed through Eau Rouge. And one small technical problem, it can destroy an entire weekend before the first lap is complete. This weekend, Spa exposed two different versions of Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli, he arrived after leaving Silverstone with 0 points. He left Belgium with pole position, victory, and control of the World Championship. George Russell arrived only 25 points behind his teammate. He did not survive the first lap. Lewis Hamilton, he was penalized for the collision that ended Russell's race. And Charles Leclerc made contact with Oscar Piastri only a few laps later and received no penalty. Ferrari briefly stole lead through the strategy. Antonelli took it back on racetrack. And Isaac Hadjar started 21st before producing one of the best recovery drives of the season. Spa did not just give us one story, it gave us 5 different arguments.
Perez goes off the track, off goes Leclerc, through goes Hamilton!
Welcome back to the Art of Motor Racing. Round 10 of the 2026 Formula One World Championship is complete. Silverstone opened the title fight. Spa changed it again. Before we break down the biggest stories, here is how the entire Belgian Grand Prix unfolded. Max Verstappen, he began Friday fastest, but Kimi Antonelli gradually took the control of the weekend. He topped the later practice sessions and then he delivered the lap that mattered in qualifying. 1 minute 44.3 placed Antonelli on pole, more than 3/10 ahead of Verstappen. Lando Norris qualified third, but a 10-place power unit penalty dropped him to 13th. That promoted George Russell onto the second row alongside Charles Leclerc. Lewis Hamilton started 5th after Ferrari rebuilt his car following a crash in the final practice session. At the start, Verstappen tagged Antonelli and briefly took the lead approaching Eau Rouge. Kimi? Well, he responded immediately and reclaimed first place on the Kimmel Straight. Behind them, Russell was passed by both Ferraris before making contact with Hamilton at Leclerc. Russell spun into the gravel and retired. Hamilton, he received a 5-second penalty, and after the restart, Verstappen passed Leclerc and began chasing Antonelli. The race then shifted during the pit stop phase. Ferrari used a virtual safety car to move Leclerc into the effective lead, placing Antonelli in the unfamiliar position of having to chase. He closed down the gap, passed Leclerc with 10 laps remaining and controlled the final stages. Antonelli won, Charles Leclerc finished 2nd, Verstappen 3rd, Hamilton 4th and Piastri 5th. Hadjar recovered from 21st to 6th, while Lando Norris, he climbed from 13th to 7th. That's the race explained. Now let's talk about what actually mattered. The first major argument from Spa is the stewarding, because within the same race, 2 wheel-to-wheel incidents, they produced 2 very different decisions. Hamilton and Russell made a contact while fighting through Leclerc on the opening lap. Hamilton, he was on the inside. Russell attempted to hold his position around the outside. The Ferrari drifted outwards through the change of direction. The 2 cars touched and Russell was sent into the gravel. The stewards decided Hamilton was predominantly responsible for the collision and handed him a 5-second penalty. That decision is understandable. Hamilton, he was the car on the inside. Contact occurred and Russell's race ended immediately. But only a few laps later, Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri made contact while fighting for 3rd. Piastri argued that Leclerc had not left him enough room. The McLaren suffered floor damage, carbon fiber was scattered onto the circuit, and Oscar reportedly lost several tenths per lap for the remainder of the race. The stewards investigated the incident, no further action. Now, the 2 collisions, they were not identical. Leclerc and Hamilton approached their respective battles from different positions. The cars were at different points in the corner, but from the outside, the decision looked difficult to reconcile. Hamilton was punished, Leclerc was not. Russell retired and Piastri continued, and that raises the uncomfortable question Formula One repeatedly struggles to answer. Are the stewards judging the action itself, or are they judging the consequence? If the punishment depends heavily on whether the other driver retires, then identical driving can receive different outcomes, depending solely on luck. A driver can make a dangerous contact but escape punishment because other car survives, and another driver can make a smaller error and receive a penalty because the victim ends up in gravel. The most surprising opinion came from Russell himself. George said he believed his collision with Hamilton it was probably just a racing incident. He was frustrated, but not primarily with Lewis. Meanwhile, Piastri continued with a damaged car and watched Leclerc finish second without receiving a penalty. The driver who retired was willing to forgive the incident. The driver who continued was left questioning why nothing happened. That does not automatically mean the stewards choose the wrong decision, but it does show that Formula One still has a serious consistency problem. When two similar incidents happen within minutes of each other, the explanation it needs to be strong enough that the audience does not have to guess what the rules mean. And at Spa, that explanation that never came. The collision with Hamilton it ended Russell's race, but it was not the reason this weekend went wrong. Russell he had struggled with an unexplained straight line speed deficit throughout the Spa weekend. In final practice, he lost a significant amount of time in the opening sector. In qualifying, the gap between the two Mercedes it was more than half a second. At a circuit where confidence, deployment, and straight line efficiency are so critical, that difference was enormous. Mercedes investigated almost everything. They investigated Russell's driving style, the drag level, the power unit, the floor, the wings, even the possibility of a mechanical resistance. The engineers could see where the lap time was disappearing. They could not confidently explain why. Then came the opening lap. Russell estimated that he left La Source with 30 to 40% less battery deployment than expected. In most circuits, that would be painful, and at Spa, it makes you defenseless. The run from La Source through Eau Rouge and to the Kimmel Straight is one of the longest acceleration zones on the calendar. Without electrical deployment, Russell was no longer racing. He was just waiting for to be overtaken. Leclerc passed him. Hamilton followed. George was then forced into an aggressive attempt to recover around the outside of Lecombe. That is why his frustration after the race was directed towards Mercedes. From his perspective, the contact was only the final stage of the problem that had already ruined his opening lap. And the timing could not have been worse. Russell arrived in Belgium 25 points behind Antonelli. The championship had tightened dramatically after Silverstone. This was supposed to be his opportunity to keep the pressure on his teammate. Instead, Antonelli took pole by a comfortable margin and won the race. Russell scored nothing. The gap is now 50 points. That is what makes Spa more worrying than a simple racing incident. Canada, it cost Russell through reliability. Monaco cost him through a faulty timing system. And in Belgium, the car was technically running, but George still could not extract the expected performance. A visible mechanical failure can be identified and repaired. An unexplained speed deficit it is much harder to solve. Russell does not merely need a cleaner race in Hungary. He needs Mercedes to understand why the other side of the garage currently looks so much stronger. Kimi Antonelli, he had already won 5 Grand Prix before Spa, but Belgium may have delivered his most important victory. Not because it was dominant, because it was not. Antonelli arrived after 2 weekends that had damaged the feeling of inevitability around his championship. In Barcelona, his Mercedes suffered an electrical failure. At Silverstone, he won the sprint, took the pole, and then watched another technical problem destroy his Grand Prix. The speed, it remained obvious, but the points had stopped arriving. Spa tested whether those failures had affected the driver. And the answer was immediate. Antonelli controlled practice, delivered under pressure in qualifying. Then Verstappen attacked him at the start. Max, he briefly moved ahead approaching Eau Rouge, but Kimi remained composed. He positioned his Mercedes for the straight and reclaimed the lead before the lap had properly settled. Later, the race moved against him strategically. Ferrari used the virtual safety car to place Leclerc ahead. Antonelli had not made a mistake, he had simply lost track position through timing. That is where this victory becomes even more valuable than a comfortable light to flag win. He did not panic, he did not destroy his tires trying to recover immediately. He steadily reduced the gap and waited for the opportunity. With 10 laps remaining, Antonelli completed the pass. Leclerc, well, he remained close enough to apply pressure during the final stages, but Kimi stayed controlled and crossed the line less than 2 seconds ahead. Silverstone showed that Mercedes could brake. Spa showed that Antonelli's confidence had not. This was the first time this season he had been forced to rebuild a race after losing control of it. He answered Verstappen on track. He answered Ferrari's strategy. And most importantly, he answered the questions created by the previous 2 weekends. Antonelli did not need another dominant victory. He needed a difficult one. Spa gave him exactly that. Ferrari deserves credit for the Belgian Grand Prix. The team saw an opportunity during the virtual safety car, and they reacted decisively. Both the drivers were called into the pits. Double stack was completed without losing valuable track position. Leclerc, he emerged with the strategic advantage and moved into the effective lead. For once, Ferrari did not hesitate. There was no unnecessary delay, no confusion. There was no 3-lap committee meeting while the opportunity disappeared. They made the correct call, gave Leclerc a genuine chance to win. But the final result also revealed the current competitive order. Ferrari could create the opportunity. It could not defend it against Antonelli's pace. Leclerc drove well and remained within 2 seconds at the finish. But once the Mercedes reached him, he could not keep Kimi behind. That is not a strategy failure, it is a performance limitation. Hamilton's race, well, it was a little bit more complicated. The 5-second penalty meant he had to remain stationary before Ferrari could begin working on the car during the pit stop. He also requested a front wing adjustment, but the instruction, it kind of reached late to the mechanics and created confusion inside the pit box. As Hamilton was released, one mechanic stepped into the path of the right front tire while holding the adjustment tool. The Ferrari knocked him to the ground. Hamilton stopped immediately, and fortunately, the mechanic, he was not seriously injured. The stewards cleared Lewis of any personal responsibility but fined Ferrari for the unsafe release. It was a frightening incident created by several small communication failures happening all at once. The penalty delay, the late adjustment request, the mechanic looking down at the tool, and the release light turning green. None of those details should have created a danger. Together they did. Hamilton still recovered to fourth while Leclerc took second. Ferrari has now won at Barcelona, won at Silverstone, and nearly won at Spa. That is enough evidence to say the team has become a regular threat. But Belgium also showed the remaining gap. Ferrari can challenge Mercedes through strategy or when the opportunity arrives. When the Mercedes works perfectly, matching Antonelli over a full race distance, it remains far more difficult. Spa is traditionally one of the better circuits for accepting a power unit penalty. The long straights, it create overtaking opportunities, and starting near the back is less damaging here than it would be at some place like Monaco or Hungary. This weekend, Lando Norris and Isaac Hadjar both needed recovery drives. Norris qualified third, but then a 10-place penalty dropped him to 13th. Hadjar reached Q3 before a much larger collection of penalties sent him 21st. Both drivers had competitive cars. Both had opportunities to recover, but Red Bull executed the stronger race. Hadjar and his team used the early safety car period aggressively. They cycled through tire compounds, opened strategic options, and gave him the freedom to attack the midfield. From there, Hadjar drove an incredibly clean race, avoided the opening lap trouble. He managed his tires, he passed the cars he needed to pass, and he finished 6th after starting 21st. Norris also moved forward quickly. He began on the hard tire, climbed through the field, and briefly led while the front-runners completed their pit stops. But McLaren chose not to stop him during the second virtual safety car. The team hoped the neutralization might become a full safety car. It did not. When Norris eventually stopped, the opportunity had disappeared. A slow pit stop added more damage, and he recovered to only 7th. McLaren later admitted that taking the virtual safety car pit window would have probably been a better decision. That contrast defined the midfield story. Hadjar began 8 positions behind Norris and finished 1 place ahead. Norris had the faster starting position. Hadjar had executed the race better. Piastri's damaged floor also limited the other McLaren, allowing Hamilton to pass him during the closing stages. McLaren left Belgium with 5th and 7th. Those are respectable results, but the car appeared capable of much more. Hajar, meanwhile, turned back row start into one of the standout performances of the weekend. While the championship leaders debated stewarding, battery deployment, and strategy, Isaac simply kept passing cars until only 5 remained ahead of him. The championship is not over, but after Spa, the drivers chasing Antonelli they require more than just their own strong results. Kimi now leads with 204 points. Lewis moves to second with 159. George Russell falls to third with 154. Charles Leclerc remains fourth with 126. Antonelli's advantage is 45 points over Hamilton and 50 over Russell. Before Belgium, Russell controlled part of his own destiny. If he consistently beat Antonelli, he could continue reducing the gap. After Belgium, that is no longer enough. George now needs strong weekends on his own and mistakes, failures, or poor results from the championship leader. Hamilton is technically Antonelli's closest challenger, but Ferrari still needs to prove it can regularly beat Mercedes through outright performance. Leclerc's recent results, they have also pulled him closer, but he remains amongst almost 80 points behind. Verstappen continues to threaten podium and occasional victories, although Red Bull has not yet shown consistency required to lead the title fight. Antonelli remains the central figure. The lead is not insurmountable, but Spa gave him the breathing room at the exact moment the championship had begun closing around him. Spa promised to expose weakness, and it did. Mercedes still cannot explain why George Russell struggles so badly for speed. The stewards created two decisions that will be debated long after the paddock leaves Belgium. Ferrari executed one of its strongest races of the season, but still lacked the pace to secure victory. McLaren missed the opportunity, Isaac Hajar seized one, and Kimi Antonelli responded to two painful weekends with the kind of victory championship campaigns are built on. Next up, Formula One heads to Hungaroring, a narrow technical circuit. Where overtaking is difficult, qualifying is crucial, and Spa's straight line speed advantages will almost mean nothing. So tell me in the comments, did Lewis Hamilton deserve the penalty for the collision with Russell? And should Charles Leclerc also have been punished for his contact with Piastri? Is George Russell still a genuine championship threat, or did Spa put Kimi Antonelli firmly back in control? Smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and remember, we cover both Formula 1 and MotoGP. So if you're here only watching the cars, you're only getting half the chaos. I'll see you in Hungary.